Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this 8th Cobas conference. Thank you all so much for coming. This year, the news, before we begin with our investment team presentation, we have decided to introduce to you our app, Brainvestor, and share with you the results of our observatory with everything that has to do with financial psychology and how emotions impact when making decisions. We do believe that this is a field that has become quite important in the financial world, and this is why we have Paz Gomez Ferrer today here with us, who's a coach and an expert psychologist in the financial sector. And from the beginning of Brainvestor, we're actually going to tell you how this was born, has been working at Cobas with us in this initiative. And the idea is basically to tell you how Brainvestor was born, what Brainvestor is, some of the results that we have seen in these last 3 years with this app, and then some questions, and then we'll close. And to begin, we would like to just say that everything was born when Cobas decided to launch this app, and it was all based on this sentence of Benjamin Graham: the main problem of an investor, their worst enemy is themselves. And I think that all of us who are in this room have made some investment decisions that we regret, that were a failure, and that is something that we can work on, and we do believe that there are tools to do so. So it was born, as you all know, from Cobas and Santa Comba's initiative, because we're focusing on disseminating information, having a better financial training, so that those of us who are saving in different instruments can learn about this. It doesn't have to only be investment funds. So that is why we decided to set this up, to help in savings and investment, and also for some self-knowledge, so that we know ourselves in a way that will allow us to make better investment decisions. And we also have experts, prestigious experts, who have been helping us along the way. And having said this, I will give the floor to Pat so that she can tell us about behavioral finance, because I'm sure that she will give us some tips so that we can improve our performance in this field. Thank you so much, Carlos. I am very happy to be able to share with you this perspective that we now have with all of this information on Brainvestor. Now, behavioral finance, everything that has to do with it is quite fashionable, not just in the finance sector, but also in organizations and public administrations. This is quite en vogue. And where does it come from? Well, in the mid-20th century, we understood that there was the Homo economicus. It was a rational being who invested in a rational way. And years later, from the 50s onward, I'm sure you know Daniel Kahneman, who is a Nobel Prize in economy with Mr. Tversky as well. He did some studies that showed that there are many external and internal components, heuristics, bias, beliefs, learning journeys that make those decisions less rational than we might think they are. And behavioral finance summarizes all of these psychological hypotheses and economical hypotheses and financial hypotheses, so that we can better understand the way in which human beings make these decisions. And that's where we have been working with our test. And one of the things that we did, and where this comes from, we haven't just made it up. This comes from a previous study before the pandemic, where we started working on how we could help investors make better decisions to avoid that bias. And that is where Cobas' team, and thanks to you, because this is a project co-created with Cobas investors and non-Cobas investors. So it doesn't just come from Cobas, and it was led by Pablo Ramirez, who is the CEO of Sin Palabras. And we want to remember him because he was the one leading these great experts in this project. He's not amongst us today, but we do remember him. And that's how we started with this emotional journey map. What are the insights of investors when they invest? And these are some of the drawings that we had, so that we could tell how investors felt before they invested. So the before, I study my needs. Some investors showed uncertainties, doubts. Some were hopeful, depending on the financial level that they each had. What sorts of investments can there be? And we have new emotions, lack of knowledge, to be reaffirmed in our decisions. What are my expectations? And then we have hopefulness and fear, and then how we make these decisions. And that's when we saw that in this emotional curve, many investors didn't have the skills and competencies to make safe decisions. And what we wanted was to have that situation where investors were really aware of what they were choosing. And that is how this whole process was not just something that took place during the investment process, but also when making decisions and expecting profitability from them. And what are the conclusions that we draw? Well, one of the things that we saw was a clear need of going hand in hand with our investors during their whole investing journey. The launch of Brainvestor took place in November 18th, 2021. Right now it has been downloaded over 3,000 times. This allowed us to carry out a research project with a colleague from Comillas. We have patented two tests: the investor behavior and then the biases. And we see the investor profile with all the biases that we have seen. Now, currently, we are present in the official colleges of psychologists in Las Palmas, in Barcelona, and we will also be present during the event for the recognition of Kahneman's now that he has passed. So there is much interest. Not only are we present in these events, but we also had 7 different workshops with all the experts. And why this impact? Because we want to develop these self-knowledge of investors and improve their skills when making decisions, making investment decisions, so that they're the right decisions. We realize that there are 2 emotions. We have fear, and then we have on this feeling of being unsettled, of being anxious. And that is what led us to studying the biases. We have an excess of trust when we feel very safe. That's for investors who have a high purchasing power. And we have actually issued 2 press releases, and we see that the more financial knowledge we have, the less bias we have. And the more we know ourselves, in order to know the investor profile, the more safety and the less bias we see. And secondly, not only do we have bias as a cognitive process, but then there are some emotions such as being unsettled or anxious or feeling fear that will create certain biases. How can we see that? Well, we see it mainly in a sample with 90% men who are 12 to 82 years old. And in women, I'm actually calling out for women because we really wanted to start investing, and we also wanted to know what was the profile of young investors because they're the future, and what was their preference for investment funds. That would be 56.3 equity and 23.4 index funds and 10.5 in mixed funds. And the use that they will give their investment will be after 10 years, and 26.7% think that 5 to 10%. They invest over 75% of their assets if they are 35 to 55 years of age. And the fear or anxiety with regards to loss makes them invest in funds for less than 3 years. There is a lesser percentage of their assets being invested, and they do not take on risks. And this financial knowledge, we see that the greater it is, the more we face risks, and there is less bias, especially with regards to being against loss. And we also think that one of the important points is how do you feel, or what do you link the word volatility? And these people see it as an opportunity, not as a risk, because we're talking about people who have a medium to high financial knowledge. So we see here the archetype and the profile of investors, and we are actually a mirror for them to see themselves and know themselves. So we differentiate. We have 3 categories: the conservative, the moderate, and the aggressive investors. Some of them say, I'm very conservative. How can I go from being conservative to being a bit more aggressive and dare more? The best experience is to actually invest. So you have to invest, and it's in practice that you will actually get that experience and that culture. You know that conservative, it all works depending on what is your aversion to risk. Conservatives are always going to feel better in long term and fixed. And moderate are the people who diversify their portfolio and have certain experiences. And aggressive always prioritizes performance, and they take on more risks. And what happens? Well, we also have seen that usually they are too trusting, and when we have very high grades, we have to help those people better calibrate the consequences, not to consider that risks are lesser than they actually are. So what else have we done in the conservative profile? Well, what are the most important biases? Being against loss or anchorage, and the hyperbolic discount. And as for moderates, we see that there is a bias of authority, affinity, and dragging, really. And what are the biases that we have seen with aggressive profiles? Confirmation, selective perception, and halo effect. And if we study each of these biases, we do see that they correspond with the personality. And what does this mean? This helps us because in Brainvestor you have different knowledge modules, and what we do is we make suggestions. You have these biases have been better identified, and you should maybe have emotional management modules 1 and 3, for instance, so that you can take them into account. This is a way of managing it. So what are the main biases? The ones that we're really working on, we saw them during the workshops in a practical, theoretical way, and we've also been working with best practices with the experts that are here. We have aversion to loss, confirmation, being anchored, authority, excess of trust, and being part of the herd. So let's talk about these for a little bit. Yes, thank you, Pat. So the idea is, actually the first question that I want to ask you is, what are the biases that you have identified thanks to these answers that investors have given us that really have an impact in the decision making of our investors? Well, one of those biases that we have worked on, because sometimes it's unconscious, we don't even realize that we have it, is the excess of trust bias in people who are very young, who have a high purchasing power, and who are a bit impulsive. And new generations, we're really working on the culture of effort, the value of money, so that excess of trust disappears. And there is another that also belongs to the context, which is the herd bias. I feel more comfortable doing what most people do, and we saw that in, for instance, with tech companies, and I link that to this fear of missing out, that FOMO. It seems that I have to be everywhere. I don't want to miss out on anything. I do not have a self-critical way of thinking, and I feel comfortable investing where others invest. I do not know the product. I don't know where I'm investing, but since I'm part of the herd, I feel more comfortable. And that, it's true, that may cause some important mistakes because that person doesn't know their investment profile. They have invested in something that in the long term will generate more uncertainty, and the odds of them making the wrong decisions are high. So what can we do as investors? What can we do? What would you recommend for us to do when working on those biases? I'm going to do my promo bit. So download Brainvestor, come to our mentoring and free workshops. But what we are really seeing first, that you have to know what the biases are. You need to know the differences between one and the other, because unconsciously sometimes we look for information to try and just prove our hypothesis, and that is the confirmation bias. So we just have an information that is the anchor, and we will not question that. So we need to know the bias. Secondly, we need to know our own bias. We need to know what is the bias or the trend that we have. And thirdly, we have to accept them. Fourthly, we have to have an investment criteria. So especially when things are quiet, calm, we saw that in the test, those are the emotional management moments where I need to have my long-term criteria. Those criteria will go hand in hand with the strategy. So when the market drops and I am in a situation of uncertainty, of ill-being, and I'm restless, I have to go to my criteria and be committed to my goals in the long term. There is an important thing, which is knowing how to wait, and it's also very important to have a perspective that of some other person, and you have to play devil's advocate and say, before I invest, I have to do the devil's advocate. Why could this go wrong? So that I can make decisions as neutrally and as objectively as possible. So all of those things are some of the things tips that we give you. And with some participants, we have even written a diary. How do I feel before, during, and after the investment? A diary where I talk about my success experiences, the learnings that I have had, what was the bias during that time. And sometimes we have more of a tendency to have that or the other. How important is it to be patient when you invest? I think that patience is the best antidote for impulsivity. So in these situations, with the society of the 21st century where we're all in a rush, patience is something that we don't usually exercise. So you have to be patient first because it forces you to have a long-term vision. And patience is something that you really have to think about the benefits that it will bring you in the long term, not in the short term. And that helps us know ourselves and to work on our impulsivity points, stress, emotional management, knowing how to wait. And you have to be humble as well. It's one of the characteristics that we work on. And also you have to adjust your expectations to your investments. When you don't have clear expectations, you don't have a clear focus on your investment, you become more impatient and you're more sensitive to what people think of you. So impatience is going to be present, and we will always work in the same way. So we have to stop. We have to have an action protocol during that moment and say, well, I'll wait until tomorrow. I'm going to quiet my mind. I'm going to have some sort of reflection so that I can see what I'm doing. So someone else should maybe help us, and we have to work on that and have some self-criticism. So we have to be aware of what it is that we do as investors, yes, and we have to understand that sometimes you have to wait more than you would like to see the success in your results. Yes, and it's actually not a matter of money. Sometimes it's just a matter of knowledge. So being a good investor, you have to invest in yourself, and you have to invest in working all of these skills. Okay, thank you. So we'll finish our intervention. I just wanted to remember Warren Buffett and one of his most famous quotes, especially with regards to knowing thyself as an investor, as the one that we can see here. The most important investment that you can make is in yourself. And this is key for any investor. Those of you who have time, you should work on your own training. Financial training, financial culture, which we talk so often about at Cobas and Santa Comba Group. So basically, Brainvestor has, Beth has said it, but it's a free app. Investors as well as non-Cobas investors are already registered and participate in this app, and you will find all sorts of contents, audiovisual content with experts who have worked with us in those contents, podcasts, videos, but also written content. As I said, podcast as well. We have different tests. We have games so that it's more dynamic. And it's actually something that helps us learn in this financial world in a fun way so that it's not just theory. And obviously the workshops, we started organizing them over a year ago. We've already organized our 7th workshop. And you're all obviously invited to follow along online or coming to it with experts who have come to share their knowledge with us in an altruistic way. And this is an app that we hope will be impactful amongst investors so that they can make better decisions when investing. And finally, as a homage to Daniel Kahneman, who passed not long ago, we wanted to write this quote of his: we can't avoid experimenting emotions, but we can control our reactions towards those emotions. So it's important sometimes to act with a cold head. Try and stop and think about the situation and understand that we're responsible of our actions and our decisions. And in the investing world, it's the same thing, really. It's just like day-to-day life. So that is all we wanted to show you. Thank you so much for listening to us. And in 10 minutes, we will start with our conference, and we hope you'll like it. Thank you.